Okay, good afternoon. It's 2:30 here in Helsinki and 1:30 Central European time. It's been the shortest day of the year. Very sunny one, a very cold one. But we are all here still before the holiday season kicks in to start a seminar, a webinar that we are very happy here in the European Parliament Liaison Office to organize again with the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, TEPSA, and the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, FIIA. My name is Jarmo Oikinen. I'm the head of the EPLO here in Helsinki, and I'm very happy to do this again. We had a fairly similar seminar last year, about a year ago, and I'm happy to do this again. The theme of today is solidarity and the future of Europe. Solidarity obviously goes to the core of the idea of Europe as a political community. It could be argued that it's been very much discussed and debated from the beginning of the integration process in Europe after the Second World War, and that is, of course, is obviously reflected also even formally in some of the treaty references to mutual help and mutual assistance in the treaty. But obviously it has a particular significance today and right now in terms of the COVID crisis that we are all facing across Europe and even globally. The response to the COVID crisis in terms of the recovery package and things related to that. But also, I think it has a significant relevance in terms of the particular situations we have on our borders today, both in terms of potential security issues and security cooperation in Europe, which is being discussed at highest levels these days, as well as on the issues related to migration and asylum policy, where the issue of responsibility sharing has been widely discussed. Here to discuss this, we have a very high-level panel from the European Parliament. I welcome Vice President Katarina Barley, who has been Vice President of the Parliament since 2019, and before that has high-level experience in German politics, including 10 years as minister in the federal government. Professor Michal Kading, who holds the Jean Monnet Chair and is professor of European integration and politics at the University of Duisburg-Essen. Eleonora Poli from the Italian Institute of International Affairs, a widely published scholar of European affairs. And then finally, our friend here in Helsinki, Juha Jokela, who is well known to all Finns as the director of Europe program in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs and an active commentator on European affairs in various venues. For the participants of this event, I would just mention that we have opened the chat in the Teams platform, so you are very welcome to present your questions there, and as of the moderator of this event, I will be picking up questions as we go along. The running order for today's proceedings is that we will start with the expert interventions by Michal, Eleonora, and Juha, and then we move on to a commentary from the political side by Vice President Barley, and then more or less we will go along as the momentum dictates. So if there are questions which are rising from the first interventions, we will focus on them, and then we will try to pick up as many of your questions from the chat as we go along. Without any further commentary from my side, I will turn the floor to Professor Kading. Michal, please, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jarmo. Thank you very much for your kind introductory words, and thank you for organizing this just a few days before the holiday season starts. It's a topic of great importance, and I'm very happy that we succeeded in bringing together 41 chapters an edited volume on EU solidarity in practice, which gives you an excellent idea about what's happening on the ground in the various EU member states and neighboring member states or neighboring countries to the European Union. And this is a very interesting journey. I invite you to embark with us today and also when reading the book, because that's in the end what we all believe, all the contributors, Eleonora and Juha, representing 2 of the 41 chapters here today in this panel, that in the end, in order to make the European Union work, we have to understand what's going on in all EU member states, not in the only and exclusively the usual suspects, but in all EU member states and the neighboring countries to the EU in order to make this project a successful one. And for this, we have come up with the very topical idea of EU solidarity in action, because if we have witnessed something over the last couple of decades, then it is probably that with the financial, economic, sovereign debt crisis, with the migration crisis, with the Brexit, the pandemic, the discussions in the end, which turned out to be quite successful, but in the lead up of the MFF negotiations and so on and so forth, showing that the EU-European solidarity cannot be taken for granted. And this is exactly what these 41 chapters are all about. They give us an idea about the different forms and shapes of European solidarity in practice. European solidarity in practice in Valletta, for example, in Malta, from the capital's perspective there, in Poland, in Czechia, etc., etc. So this is the starting point. And what we see in these various contributions, and in the end, it's the authors, the contributors, not the editors, Johannes Pollack, Paul Schmidt, and myself, but the authors, the contributors, the real stars of this volume, show very nicely that European solidarity is, amongst others, considered by many, but not by all, as a European value that has to be basically put up there as a priority, and hence defining a motive for action. So you will read in many of these contributions that the European Union, considered to be a union of people and of sovereign national states, that these interdependencies between human beings and states create, in a number of cases, so the argument, a moral duty for supporting each other's at all times, not only in response to the pandemic. But then I'm very much confident that when we will listen to Eleonora's presentation, that this might be sometimes indeed lacking, and not all member states will actually, in times of severe crisis, will notice immediately the response and the solidarity in practice. You will read in some of the chapters that EU solidarity is considered a cornerstone of the European integration process. And many give answers by providing policy-specific insights on solidarity in action. And you will see automatically that for some countries, some policy areas are more important than other policy areas, and hence the Finns will probably more connect with a more security dimension to the European integration project, whereas, for example, a Maltese would more think around migration-related issues. What is also quite important is that we discover that many of these contributions also refer to European solidarity inspiring EU institutions, which is also important, and some chapters actually reflect upon that we have a de facto consensus system in the European Council with a club spirit in action. We have in the Council the principle of double majority, which is also, if you want, a principle of solidarity ingrained in the Council of Ministers, because it does not only count to be a sovereign state, but also the aspect of population does play a role. So the double legitimization, if you want. And we have obviously also the European Parliament with the principle of digressive proportionality. You could say this is also key principle of European solidarity inspiring the institutions. For most, what is important, and probably I will stop here then also with my short introduction, that this journey throughout these 41 national perspectives help us to understand that European solidarity has very different forms and has very many different forms and shapes. It's starting on the ground. We see differences between, in some country chapters, between the rural and the urban areas, which is a very interesting key distinction in some of the national contributions. We see cross-regional solidarity within countries, but also across borders. Here, a very interesting concept you will see when you read the Lithuanian, the Latvian, or the Estonian chapter, the concept of the Baltic Bubble, which has become quite an interesting feature of cross-regional solidarity in action. But it's also amongst groups of EU member states, not to forget non-EU member states. So this journey throughout these 41 chapters, helps us to discover how solidarity is perceived across EU member states. It's an eye-opening journey to which I invite all of you, and I'm very much looking forward to the individual contributions. And I would like to thank already now Vice President Barley to have been available and willing to contribute the forward to this edited volume. Thank you very much, and back to you, Jarmo. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal, for this broad outline, and not just that, but also very interesting openings in terms of what solidarity means from this cross-European perspective. And the next we are going to get an interesting parallel that we can make between Rome and Helsinki, and we'll start from Italy. Eleonora Poli from the Institute of International Affairs in Rome. Please, Eleonora, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's very nice and interesting to talk about the solidarity issue in Italy and in the European Union. When I drafted this chapter, the situation was quite negative all around, Italy. Well, when the pandemic started, we all thought it was a matter of 1 month or a couple of weeks, and then, we could go back to normal life, but it was not like that. Of course, the pandemic somehow exacerbated negative sentiments towards the European Union that was already present in Italy. If you consider Italy was already facing different crises, an economic crisis, and then a migration crisis, and then COVID. And at the time, in spring 2020, the majority of the Italians used to think that basically being member of the European Union was not convenient, and the European Union has abandoned Italy again in a time of need, as it happened again during the migration crisis and before. So the sentiments across the majority of the Italians was, of course, quite negative, and it was fueled also by many political parties. The Five Star Movement on the one hand, but also the League, which is a far-right wing party, which were saying, we're kind of gaining popularity on the idea that basically the European Union was not doing enough for Italy, and other member countries were not demonstrating any sort of a solidarity. This, of course, was the main message passed by not just those parties, but basically all media. And it was difficult also for a pro-European as myself to find some kind of hope, because it's true that at the beginning the responses, the vocal response of the EU was not so vocal. Basically, we had, solidarity. If you look at the ACFR track on solidarity, you see that many actions were taken both by European institutions and European member countries. But in the first month, the impact of the crisis was really negative in Italy. We were the first country, and the response was not so visible. Then it came, and at the moment it came, you know, things started to change. If you consider that already in autumn 2020, the perception of the Italians was different around, you know, the European Union and other European member countries. Still, it is now is even better, but still there is much to be rebuilt, in the sense that many the reason behind this more positive perception around the EU and solidarity in general is due to the recovery plan. The fact that the European Union is finally investing money that, you know, will help Italy to rebuild and other member countries to rebuild their economy, and this is perceived, of course, as something positive. The only issue is that I consider an issue is that there is a risk of somehow money washing solidarity, in the sense that there is again this idea that the European Union is something positive when it does something positive for the countries. You know, it's not positive per se to be member of the European Union. The European Union has to do something to be considered a positive, you know, organization. And for this reason, there is a need to really rebuild a European identity in Italy. We used to be one of the most pro-European country, and after years and years of scapegoating the European Union for any issue that was happening in Italy, of course, the majority of the citizens now do not perceive the European Union as something that something positive or something that we should fight to be in. Is considered something that, you know, we might consider to stay just if we get something out of it. I'm sure this is the perception of many other countries, but certainly is not an attitude where we can build a solid European Union for the future. The second element that helped to change the perception was Mario Draghi, the Prime Minister. Mario Draghi is a man of the institution, of the European institutions. He is considered one of the most smart politician probably in the European Union, and the fact that he was able to form a government with the support of other parties meant that those parties that used to be not so much pro-European had to drop the anti-European rhetoric to be part of his government, or at least not to be so anti-European for no reasons. I'm talking about, for instance, the Five Star Movement or the League, that changed completely their attitude towards the European Union. Nowadays, you don't hear such a negative communication about the European Union. There is no much talk about the migration crisis, and everything is about, you know, how to spend the recovery plan and how Italy can somehow survive this pandemic, which has become also an economic recession. Certainly, as I was saying, the perception of the Italians toward the European Union today is much better. The majority of the Italians are still pro-European. My sense is that there is a need to rebuild an European identity across the Italians and in European political discourse. In the past years, traditional and non-traditional parties, both of them, used the European Union as a scapegoat to justify their failure or the lack of political reforms, of painful political reforms, without any explanation to the majority of the citizens. And of course, this, in the long term, had a negative impact on how the European Union is perceived across Italians, on the one hand. On the other, of course, there has been a lack of communication from European institutions on what the European Union could do, and the idea that the European Union per se is made by member states. So, of course, member states' government are deciding about the European future, and it's not just a bubble based in Brussels that decide over the future of citizens. So a better communication and better education would certainly help to build a more solid sense of solidarity across Italians.
Thank you, Eleonora, for this very interesting intervention on the evolution of the attitudes in Italy and what might be the building blocks going forward. Next we turn to just a few blocks away here in Helsinki to Juha Jokela, the director of the Europe program in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Juha, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jarmo, and thank you also, Eleonora and Michael, for your input for this very important topic and discussion we are having here today. My chapter on Finland was also written at the times when the COVID crisis had hit the EU and the countries were turning inside rather than outside towards the EU for support. And then, of course, here in Finland, we had quite an extensive national debate when the EU finally came back to the equation on the recovery fund and whether that sort of relates to the Finnish interests in the EU and what kind of European Union Finland would like to have. The kind of key argument of my chapter, and it was meant to be a provocative one, so I picked the title actually from the Brexit debate, and I was arguing and writing about Finland as being in danger of being seen by others as cherry picking on solidarity. And the key rationale of this kind of argument was that Finland has highlighted throughout its membership the solidarity in the field of security and defense, and clearly EU is a security community for Finland, and that Finland would like to see that community grow stronger. But at the same time, it has shied away from the solidarity cause of other member states, which often relates to the field of economy, in particular to the fiscal policy of the EU. And this is, of course, we're all aware of the Finnish positions during the Eurozone crisis, and even beyond that with regard to the EMU reforms, and then also the difficulty with the acceptance of the recovery package here in Helsinki. So my advice for the Finnish policymakers and policy community here in Finland was that Finland should reassess its approach to solidarity, given these two conflicting trends in the Finnish EU debates. And this was not to suggest in the chapter that Finland should simply change its positions in the EU negotiation tables, but to work towards a more nuanced and comprehensive national discussion, what EU solidarity is about and what are the key features for a stronger EU in an increasingly turbulent world. And I also suggest in the chapter that Finland should perhaps work harder to explain its own views on solidarity, which are shaped by its peripheral location and historical experiences and the narratives related to those. So very shortly, given the time we have here today, I first perhaps say something about the EU solidarity in the field of security, and then in the field of economy, and then conclude with the kind of a couple of key points. I think the audience here in Helsinki is well aware of the EU, Finland's EU membership in 1995, and how that was seen as kind of a clear security policy choice for Finland. It was quite interesting when we were discussing the 25th anniversary of Finland, Austria, and Sweden in the EU a couple of years back. Those discussions with the Austrian and Swedish colleagues often pointed out that the economic rationale was key for Austria and Sweden, and Finland stood out as a kind of a country which joined the EU, of course, because of economic interests, but also clearly because of political and security policy interests. And also the Euro membership in 1999 was discussed in this capital as a kind of a security policy choice, to some extent, at least bringing in indirectly security policy benefits, as having same currency with Berlin and Paris, for instance, would make Finland an integral part of the currency union and the EU. And after the Ukraine crisis, we've seen very clearly that Finland has aimed to make most out of the security policy benefits of the EU membership. This includes also the potential hard security benefits, which are now enshrined in the treaties. So jointly with France, Helsinki has highlighted the importance of EU's mutual assistance clause, the 42.7 article in the Lisbon Treaty, and called for clarification and concrete meaning for this treaty-based commitment. Finland has also worked very hard to deeper European defence cooperation, and it has underlined EU's role also in the field of various kinds of hybrid threats. Yet Finland has not decided to join to NATO, and the common view here in Helsinki has often highlighted that this could create more security tensions in the northeastern corner of Europe than solve those. But given all these high hopes and practical policy choices that Finland has had in terms of the security policy field, Finland has, however, shied away when it comes to economy and fiscal policy of the Union. And here Finland clearly highlights the national responsibility of member states of their finances and economy. And this is quite interesting, as consecutive Finnish governments have highlighted this national responsibility rather than joint responsibility. And I think the audience of this webinar is quite well aware of the Finnish positions during the Eurozone crisis and also with regard to the EMU reforms. And Finland has precisely resisted any move towards a joint debt creation or notable fiscal capacity at the EU level. And this is why the next generation EU, as well as the joint debt issuance, grants and loans, proved politically very difficult for Finland, and actually the political parties and institutions here return to that at the moment when the ratification of EU's own resources came to the parliament. And it was a very exciting situation whether that actually will go through in Finland or whether Finland would provide a negative answer to that. So although I suggest in my chapter that there is this danger that other member states might see these conflicting approaches to EU solidarity as cherry picking, and this is why Finland should really discuss and debate its positions and also consider what kind of challenges this very negative approach to EU solidarity in the field of economy could constitute to its broader EU objectives. I would like to conclude with a very brief 2 points on solidarity, which might at least partly explain the Finnish position and hopefully also lead to some discussion. So first, I think, and during the years after the Ukraine crisis also and the dramatic changes in the European security landscape, I think Finland has noted that there seems to be a rather limited enthusiasm among the other member states to build credible solidarity mechanisms in the field of security and defense. This is not to dismiss these developments, what have taken place, and the argument that within the last 2 or 3 years more has happened in the field of common security and defense policy than within the past 20 years. But anyway, there seems to be sort of a lack of interest, especially to work towards the kind of a harder security solidarity mechanisms as enshrined in the treaty. And this is of course understandable when 23 members of the EU are also a member of the NATO, and the treaty is also very clear that the alliance remains the basic security organization for those member states. But I would also highlight another element of potentially Finnish view on solidarity, and this relates to the history of the nation, also including major wars and economic recessions. And this seems to still underline, or the narratives around those events seem to underline the peripheral location of the country. And it also partly questions the attainability or credibility of any external solidarity. So I would say that against this background, for Finns, carrying out national responsibilities and building up self-reliance as well as resilience could actually be a manifestation of solidarity and a desired pathway to make the EU stronger in the face of the current and future crises. And I will stop here and look forward for the commentaries and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juha, for these perceptive points that you made. Very interesting. I think that based on these first three interventions, I just had to make a very small comment myself that given that this TEPSA project has been going on for the past year, as I understand, I mean all these points bring very real at this very particular moment politically. If we think about the COVID crisis, the recovery instrument and its use, and how Europe is going to economically survive this situation, and the security dimension, which came up most prominently in Juha's interventions, I think these are very much part and parcel of where we are today. And thinking about the future, of course, I mean, I think that one of the key elements has to be talking about solidarity is what is the relationship between Europe as a in a sense combination of and reconciliation of national interests in a more narrow sense, an agreement between member states, and the idea of solidarity, which means that we are basically in the same boat and we should be able to manage and help each other out in that context. But this is all very interesting. But now we will turn to Vice President Katarina Bali, who has been listening to these first initial interventions. Mrs. Bali, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for all these very interesting inputs. Being a very convinced European, of course, you won't be astonished that solidarity, and being a social democrat, of course, too, that solidarity for me is one of the absolute key notions of the European Union at all. And if we listen to these interventions from different points of view, then we see that the whole European Union can simply not function without this notion of solidarity. If it's economically, you have very different member states in size, in economical power. If it comes to historical experiences, which of course lead to different points of view in terms of security and foreign policy, then we see if you decide to do this, if you decide to join as a European Union, you have to agree to a notion of solidarity. Otherwise, it just cannot work. If you only pursue your own interests, it can't. And this becomes even more important in modern times, in times of globalization, of digitalization, of migration. We see that we are bound to work together, and we have to. I strongly believe that we are at a crossroad now, where we have to decide if this is still what we want, because we see certain member states who do not agree on the fundamental values anymore. I just want to introduce this to our discussion, because with the countries that we have looked at now, Germany, Italy, Finland, I think there is, even listening very carefully to what Eleonora said, I think there is still a common understanding that we want to be Europeans, and that we want to contribute to that, as well in the population, but also on the governmental side. But we now have countries who do not, who think that a Europe of nations is the way to go, which includes refraining from other European fundamental values, democracy, rule of law, etc., going their own way there too. So I think we are really at this very, very decisive moment in history now, where we have to define what kind of European Union we want. My strong belief is that if we do not agree on fundamental values, then there will not even be a torso of a European Union. We cannot even have a common market if we do not agree on these fundamental values. So I think it is absolute key that we understand each other, and we've seen these very different perspectives so well in these interventions. If I would add, I'm half British and half German. Already there, I mean, believe me, in times of Brexit, I mean, this challenge that you have to really fulfill to put yourself into the shoes of the other, and see what how a balanced relationship could look like. I think this is what it's all about now, and the Corona crisis has really brought it on spot. I felt ashamed in the first period of Corona crisis towards Northern Italy, where my country, my primary country, my Germany, just said, you know, who knows, maybe we will need these intubators later. And let's grab hold of the mask that we need for ourselves. I felt ashamed for that, and many of my fellow citizens did. And I'm very happy that we moved beyond that we afterwards had a very big phase of solidarity, of social security systems, of health security systems, being very, very solidary with others, taking over patients that could not be dealt with in their home countries, etc. So I think it goes really to the core as well of the European Union, as well to ourselves as human beings. So I just want to leave it there because I found it so interesting to see these different points of view, and wanted to wrap it up from my European point of view. We have to be a union of solidarity, or we are not a union.
Thank you, Vice President Barley. I will make a point that that your camera was not on. If it worked before we started, so if this was just a technical glitch that you might be able to recover, you can do so. But thank you very much for your intervention. I think it, in a sense, it presented a kind of a challenge also for our three expert speakers that we had beforehand, in terms of linking the European values and how solidarity, in a sense, embodies or is based on or is dependent on the existence of common understanding of European values, on which the European Union, on the basis of the basic treaties, is founded upon. So maybe this is something where we could start off the discussion, and maybe I'll turn to Michael to kick off the next round, just to see that you didn't really mention this particular angle in your first intervention when you in a sense you described the various contributions to the TEPSA project. How do you see the situation, and what would be your view of the from the pan-European perspective? Do we still have a chance of building solidarity on the basis of European values, and is there a basis in terms of if you look at the contributions from different capitals in different member states and even outside the Europe in your project?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, my answer would be definitely yes. The various chapters show very nicely, and also I'm very glad, and I would like to also pick up where Vice President Barley stopped. I mean, quoting her, EU cannot function without solidarity. This is something that implicitly you will read throughout many of those 41 chapters. But the perception and the experience over the last couple of years has been have been quite mixed. So you will have also an understanding of solidarity as a reciprocal kind of expectation, right? With Malta having been at the forefront, if you might remember, for example, at the forefront when it came to taking on board migrants, playing a central role in the evacuation of the EU foreign nationals during the Libyan civilian war of 2011. And then during the refugee crisis, Malta, at least if you read the chapter, the author will underline that it feels like being left alone. So on the one hand, showing solidarity vis-a-vis Europe, but at the same time, when things get a bit more difficult, it feels somehow disillusioned because it's not receiving. So expecting a reciprocity concept behind solidarity, but not perceiving. The other one with regard to values, read the Polish chapter. Incredibly eye-opening in many regard, because here the author underlines very much that Poland, that solidarity with Poland is what is expected, but do not expect solidarity from Poland. That's a little bit the quintessence of the chapter, and it's really eye-opening and striking because the chapter explains very nicely why Poland actually expects to be at the receiving end of solidarity. As a deserving country, which was betrayed by its allies, forced to the Soviet zone, solidarity with Poland is needed as a form of compensation for the misfortunes experienced. So it is super interesting to read the Polish chapter and to get this additional view on what's actually going on in Poland. But I also would like to agree here, as I mentioned earlier, that many chapters do and would stress Vice President Barley's point as well, that solidarity is not just a European value, which you could find in Article 2, for example, of the treaties, but it is also becoming more and more in a few and more countries an additional narrative why we need the European Union and what makes the European Union different also on the global scene. It's not only about an internal market, about wealth. It's not only about security and peace related issues, which are all very valid and still will be valid to different degree, to different countries, because Malta has very different interests in joining the European Union project than Germany or France or Poland. Very mixed setup. But I think that some of the chapters show this, and Vice President Barley made this point also very clear, that this emerging and in some countries already very present, we see in the European elections 2019, it has already been quite an important topic, but we see in more and more countries this aspect of fundamental values for which the European Union stands and for which it is worth making an extra effort in order to make it work and to think about the future of Europe, is a narrative that becomes more and more visible, more and more tangible, not in all, but in many EU countries. So here, that I would leave it here for the time being, and I look forward to the other comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you again, Michal. Next, I turn to Eleonora. I mean, you, in your first intervention, you described the Italian attitudes a bit more, say more coldly calculated way, that their attitudes which are kind of seeing the value of Europe if it benefits Italy directly, and maybe less so as a common project between member states. How do you see this issue in terms of building solidarity on the basis of fundamental values, and whether that kind of approach still has resonance in the Italian context, please?
It's an interesting question. I would say, on the one hand, that Italy is similar to some respect to Poland, but not in total, basically. What I can perceive from society is that there is a lack of trust towards generally institutions, but particularly European institutions. And this has changed in the last, I would say, 6-7 years, in the sense that the European Union and the European institutions were considered in Italy, used to be considered in Italy more relevant than national institutions. Like Italians used to trust European institutions more than the national governments and perceived the European Union to be somehow important for making Italy better democracy, a better functioning countries with better institutions, better rules, somehow in advancing, towards a better democracy. Now this perception has somehow gone lost. And I think, as I said, there are many reasons. I think the economic trends certainly had an impact even before COVID. The migration crisis, of course, but it has been also a lot about the political communication we received in Italy. This has contributed to change the perception Italians had about and have about the European Union. Because if you hear every day, bad news or impartial communication about the European Union and the European policies, of course at some point you tend to trust it. I remember, just an example of my personal life when I used to live in the UK, being very much pro-European and living in London for a while. I was reading of course British newspaper, and at some point I was thinking maybe everything I knew about the European Union is wrong, because here, everything I read about the European Union is quite, it's quite negative or not so positive as it used to be in Italy at the time. So, of course, media and the way, the European Union is communicated has a fundamental impact. On solidarity, my perception is that, of course, you have to give to receive, and there is no way you can just pretend that European institutions are there just to save you. This should be, a logical assumption that everybody should be aware of. What I think is that the COVID might help, European member countries to rebuild a more solid European Union, simply because this time, this crisis somehow hit all European countries in different way, but in the end, in the same way. So, of course, everyone had to face, similar issues sooner or later, maybe with more numbers or less numbers, but this maybe is the first time that all European member countries are facing the same challenge at the same time. And this, I think, could help, European member countries to coordinate more their action as they are doing, but also in rebuilding a sort of trust in the European common project, as to abandon, the idea of Europe of nations, but to build a real and truthfulness European Union. But I still think that we need to start from citizens, and education, again, is really much important. It doesn't mean that we have to brainwash citizens, but just to show them that being alone at this time is probably not the best option for everybody, on the one hand, and on the other, being part of the European Union can contribute to build better institutions for real, not just for an ideal. Thank you.
Jarmo, we cannot hear you.
Except I have a problem with microphone. Thank you, Eleonora, for your intervention. I think what stood out there for me was your point about rebuilding trust with citizens, and the role that education and also communication, like you said earlier, could play in that particular situation that we are right now in. Next, I'll turn back to Juha. I mean, you mentioned there in your first intervention that Finland considered the joining of the European Union as a security community, decision for Finland. But I do remember at the time also and also since then there's been quite a lot of talk in the Finnish discourse about Europe as a values community as well. And I might even dare to say that maybe these two dimensions, values community and security community, were somewhat connected in the Finnish policy discussion at the time, at least maybe even today, in a sense that even though there were these particular clauses, solidarity clauses in the treaties, there was always also some discussion about that most probably because of this community nature of the union, the member states would probably go even further in terms of helping each other out if needed. So Juha, I would like just push you a little bit to also reflect on this challenge by Vice President Bali. I mean, what do you see as the connection between Europe of values and the Finnish perception of Europe as a security community?
It's an excellent question. I think the values are key actually here in many ways. And of course, the Finnish EU membership, it was very much about values. It was kind of anchoring Finland to the political and economic institutions of Western Europe, which of course carries certain values which were dear to Finland, and the post-Cold War environment opened up new possibilities to fast this anchor. But I think the solidarity and values, there is very interesting relationship, because we did a study a couple of years back about the public opinion related to the EU as a security community. It included sort of Eurobarometers, but also some other public opinion polls available in some of the member states as well as in Finland. And there, of course, when you look at the EU as a security community, the solidarity plays as a very important element in that discussion. But very early on, we ended up discussing also trust among the member states. If you want to make the solidarity operational and you want to build your national security on partly the solidarity, you need quite a lot of trust among the member states, but also among the citizens. And I think here there is a clear link to the values, and especially to the fundamental values of the European Union. We all know that the whole integration process is very much about sort of managing the diversity of different European values. The landscape is quite broad when we talk about values as such. But when we talk about the fundamental values, which are also enshrined in the treaties, then of course the landscape becomes much more easier to kind of to comprehend. And of course, these are the key values that the mothers and sisters of mothers and fathers of integration have thought are there. And I would say that the recent development with regard to the rule of law, the values related to the democracy, media freedom, they have been taken very seriously in Finland, and it's often argued that the previous Finnish EU Council presidency in 2019, Finland made actually the values as a key priority for the president. This was also in the conjunction of the new institutional cycle, so maybe there needed to be something a very sort of a high level to strive the presidency. But when I was asked questions of many of my colleagues and people in the Europe that why these values are so high on the Finnish agenda, I also explained to them that this is not just something that the Finnish politicians or civil servants think that is important. This is actually a matter where the politicians are challenged day after day when they go, so to say, to the constituencies. Many Finns have been asking for a long time that, you know, what is the state of the union, and in what kind of union we are in if the principles of democracy, rule of law, media freedom are sort of going in the wrong direction, so to say. And I think this has been taken very seriously here in Finland, and it is also playing a role in this solidarity discussion, especially when it comes to the sort of future of the EU and the big reform proposals that we have on the table. Whether the values are consolidated enough, whether that leads enough to trust among the member states and citizens to provide the kind of the solidarity mechanisms that are needed for Europe. I would also like to mention the point raised by Michael on the kind of the global scene and the kind of fundamental values of Europe. I fully agree with that view that this is becoming an increasingly important question, and I think you are pointing out to a very important element of it, that it's not just the interests of the member states or the European businesses in this world of increasing strategic competition that plays in the debates of the electorate. It's very much also about the kind of the fundamental values, questions of privacy when it comes to digital revolution, also the kind of the norms related to the labor and of course then in the end of the day the kind of the democratic systems, which seems to be challenged not just outside of the West or the kind of the Europe, but also within some of the key democratic states, such as the US and also some of the European states. So I think this value question and EU's global role, as well as the purpose, is in the years to come is something which is very closely tied together.
Thank you. You are very interesting. I think this final point you made about Europe's global role and how in a sense the values agenda is intertwined with the more interest-based, maybe more material interest that Europe has globally. I mean, that's quite interesting, and one could also make the same argument maybe about the connections between the values agenda on the one side and the issues of solidarity in the more material world, also within the EU and how it could be done. But next I'll turn back to Vice President Bali. You listened to this round of responses basically to the challenge that you presented to the TEPSA experts. How would you reflect on the points that were made?
I hope you can see me now. I moved in my flat closer towards the router. It's a bad connection. I'm sorry about this. Well, again, there were so many important different points reflected. I would like to go back again to Eleonora more than everything, because this, I think the aspect of communication is absolutely key. And she already raised that in her first intervention, the question of scapegoating by national politicians. This is something that we have seen everywhere in Europe. In some countries, it has become a mainstream. In some, it has been being criticized by the majority, but it does have effects. And when I entered the European Parliament in 2019 and became vice president, as a vice president, you also have a certain dossier. You do the chairing, etc., but you have a field of administration that you are responsible for. And I definitely I desperately wanted to do communication, because I said this is where we really have to become better. And I thought it's so easy, I've done it before. I go there and I tell them what to do and la la la. And then I found out that this European Parliament is doing so much, incredibly much, on the field of communication. But still, even me, as a very interested European citizen, I hadn't heard of any of these initiatives. So this is really something that is so difficult to do. The European Union, that has a core interest in communicating its advantages, its successes, its efforts, does not have the means of communication, can very only very difficultly have access to the people themselves. It's actually only via social media that you can do that. And on the other hand, the national media and the national politicians often do not have an interest in doing that. So this image of the European Union being the scapegoat, it is becoming stronger with the populists, especially on the right side, but also on the left, and it is something that we really have to combat. The other point I would like to reflect upon is, I think it was you who said it, trust between citizens. I think this is also absolutely essential. I think we always have to support contact exchanges on the ground, be it Erasmus Plus, be it twinning projects, be it partnerships between communities, whatever, so that people meet. My perception in Germany is, when it comes to Poland and Hungary, this is my main focus, political focus, is the rule of law. That it's not only we have to take care of these countries and of the people who live in these countries, that they stay true Europeans or become it, but it's also in the other countries, probably also like Finland, where ordinary people say, look, this is not our European Union. We work hard, we stick to the rules, we want to have a union of solidarity, but we are not willing to support dictatorship, let's face it, or support regimes that strip away the rights of their people. We won't do that anymore. So we really have to be careful at a lot of different levels, because the trust of the citizens and between citizens is absolutely crucial. So we have to say, look, this is the Polish regime, it's the Hungarian regime, it's not the Polish people, it's not the Hungarian people who act like that. And this is really something we have to stress very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Barley. Very interesting. Could I maybe, I mean, this is, of course, as an official of the European Parliament working on communication, this is a bit tricky question to pose to the Vice President, but could I push you a little bit to because I know your interest in communication also before your time in the Parliament. In terms of finding solutions to this dilemma of having very much nationally based media with interest in the domestic national issues, and communicating on Europe in this kind of media environment in Europe, do you see any avenues in terms of making progress?
Well, yes. In fact, within the Parliament, a group of young parliamentarians kicked off an initiative to make the European Parliament more efficient, more modern, more democratic, and communication was also part of this. And we had focus groups, and I was on the focus group communication. And as I said, first of all, one really has to see what the European Parliament already does. Very, very active on social media. I think it's the international institution with the most followers, even more than United Nations institutions, if I'm rightly informed, working with influencers to address young people who usually do not open a page when it's from the European Parliament or a European institution, working together with the national media. But we found out that we can become a lot more efficient, for example, by offering traineeships to national journalists for, I don't know, weeks maybe, to experience European institutions and see them from the inside, to give more tailor-made not the information, but the logistics. For example, providing national journalists with the names of their members of parliament in which debate they are taking part. Of course, from all the political parties. That's absolutely natural. We are impartial on that, but that they can see where they can kind of grab hold of a subject if they have national MEPs that they can interview or ask things about. Especially, it's about making European Parliament more interesting in the way that we do our debates. But there is still this one difficulty that we have. It's of course about languages and about mentality and about structures, so that for people at home this is not familiar. They feel more distant to the European Parliament than they feel to their own, and even to their own, most people feel very distant. So this is something that is really, really difficult to overcome, not to speak about the different European institutions and almost no citizen being able to explain who is who and what they do. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to say Europe is yours. It's about you. And the campaign on the last European election by the European Parliament, not by a political party, but by the Parliament, was very, very successful by involving influencers, by having ground games, by having very, very good websites. Have a look at the website, What Europe Does For Me. That's an incredibly well done website where you can see easily what Europe does for you in your in your community, but also if you have the cats, if you like to go skiing, if you are disabled, what does Europe do for me? And that is really, we're really making efforts, but it won't go without national personalities and journalists supporting these efforts.
Thank you, Vice President Bali. This is, I think, it's very interesting, and then maybe we can ask the experts in the next round maybe to take this on board. I mean, the communications aspects in terms of evaluating the way forward. But before we do that, I'll just make a point to the participants of this meeting to put forward questions. It's possible in the chat, and if there are, I will bring them along. But maybe we'll do one more round of experts, and maybe in the reverse order, so that Mikhail can then wrap it up from the point of view of the overall project, and then we give the final word to Vice President Bali. And the question that I would pose to you is basically the way forward. We have the conference on the future of Europe underway now. It has been a contentious project, I mean, between the member states and the European institutions, but it's been going forward. And now there seems to be serious discussions between different stakeholders about what would be the way forward. And I could imagine that the issue of solidarity and how much solidarity and trust the member states and the European institutions can find among each other is a core question of whether this process will lead into something concrete being done. There were these issues raised by Eleonora, especially about communication, education, rebuilding trust with citizens. Juha mentioned also rebuilding trust between governments as well, and obviously the very fundamental question about the common values base that has been raised by especially by Vice President Bali. So I mean, how do you see what would be the building blocks if we would think about a way forward in terms of rebuilding trust, rebuilding solidarity in Europe, so that we could find a useful way forward? And maybe we'll, if I can ask Juha for you to start first.
Thank you very much, Jarmo, for these very important yet very big questions. I think I just want to highlight the value side and the discussion on the values, but then also some of the core values, you know, the defense of those values. I think that's maybe the most important building block for building trust and then solidarity. But I would also highlight in this debate, and also related a little bit on the communication side of the EU, but also the member states when they kind of talk about the EU, the kind of the changing global situation with this great power or increasing strategic competition with new kind of threats, with all the global challenges that we have, including climate change and environment more generally, and the kind of the general trend that we see in many of the member states, namely that the governments and key political figures call for a stronger European Union, more efficient European Union. In international events, at least in Helsinki, there seems to be a concern often that where is the EU when important crises erupt or big meetings steering the global developments take place. But I think there should be sort of a next step related to that kind of a demand or call for stronger EU, is that what it requires from the governments and in terms of the EU reforms to have that efficient decision-making system and have that global visibility, also the influence, power, and so forth. Because to some extent, it's always easy to ask EU to do more. But then when we get to the big questions, what it requires from my government, what it requires from my party in terms of the positions we take towards the European integration, that is something that should be debated. And in the Finnish case, I also underlined the kind of the need to have this comprehensive approach on the question of European Union, that you cannot have these silos of different policy areas when you discuss about the solidarity as a basis for a stronger EU in the world, for instance. So I think that's one element. In terms of the future of the Europe conference, I think that is a quite an interesting exercise going on now, and I would really like to highlight its importance also for the Finnish audiences, because it seems to be sort of escaping sometimes the national debates. It was much more discussed here when there were these sometimes even worries that this conference on the future of Europe could lead to a treaty change process and perhaps more joint responsibility. I think this conference was watched very vigilantly here in Helsinki. Now, when it's much more a sort of a participatory process, a participatory democracy process, listening to the citizens and providing them possibilities to voice their objectives as well as views, I think there seems to be a little bit less attention paid to that, at least in the circles that I've discussed. But I think there is an important element, and this relates to the values and this relates to the democratic process of European Union. I think this participatory process can really add value and bring the citizens closer to the EU. But there also needs to be the element how this will be implemented, where these expression of views and interest among the citizens lead us, and how they will be taken care of in the decision-making process. Because I think the risk is that if there are certain important points that citizens would like the European Union to do, and then there is nothing major is happening in terms of implementation or providing those answers, then I think this conference could kind of provide a more or less a negative example of participatory democracy and the kind of the strengthening of democratic elements of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Juha. Very perceptive points. I will turn to Eleonora in Rome. You can reflect on these points raised by Juha, but obviously, how do you see the things evolving in terms of the future of Europe debate, not just the conference maybe, but also the future of Europe debate in general, and where it might lead in terms of generating more solidarity and understanding between Europeans and the member states?
I think there are different ways to see that. Also, from a more negative or positive point of view. From a sort of negative point of view, I think a lot of the future of the EU depends on the success of Brexit in the long term. So basically, if somehow the UK, I'm not saying will fail, but will not do so well by being out of the European Union, this certainly and realistically could push, member countries, also the one that are less convinced, to say, okay, actually, it's a good idea to be part of the European Union, considering that the UK is not succeeding outside the European Union. Then also, I think the administration in the US and the relevance that the administration, the government in the US will give to the European Union might result in a positive boost for the EU, to do more in the internally, but also externally. Of course, the US now has changed in the last years is not in news, but has changed, the focus of its foreign policy. So the European Union, yes, is an ally, it's a good ally, but it's not really the center of its interests. So this again might push the European Union to do more to acquire, a sort of to building a real bloc of countries cooperating together and being more than just a sum of different nations. These, of course, are negative push. We cannot build the European Union just out of basically challenges or out of necessities. We should also build the European Union because we trust the process. Of course, I think the recovery plan is a good start in the sense, but it will also depend on how the country will spend this money. But the idea that we are leaving, the austerity days in order to rebuild a sort of more welfare-oriented European Union, if this will happen, a more sustainable economy, etc., might really change basically the landscape we are used to, and start considering the fact that the European institutions as something can help, each country to become better countries in terms of both, as I said, institutions, but also economic models. I personally, I'm always be, and I will be always a pro-European, 100% pro-European, so I tend to be quite optimistic about the European Union. And I think, in the long term, the European Union will succeed in becoming something more, or a more efficient European Union if we cannot achieve something more. So a more efficient European Union as it is. But my only worry is that this the positive years that will follow will only depend by the fact that now we are all facing the same crisis, we are all facing the same issues. The European Union is responding with the financial card, but there is no a real common sense of being European. It used to, I think there was a common idea of being part of the European Union, of being European. Now is somehow we are missing it, and I think we are missing it also because we are not coherent. As it was said before, we are promoting democracy outside the European Union, but that inside we have so many countries not respecting democratic standards. And I'm talking also about my country, Italy, that is not a champion in that. We are talking about corruption outside the European Union, and then we have corruption inside. We are not able to deal with migration. So we build a sort of fortress because we cannot receive all these people on the one hand, but on the other, we are the first one, criticizing other countries for the lack of humanitarian policy, etc., etc. So I think, there should be more coherence on what we do internally in order to rebuild a stronger European Union, and we cannot just build a stronger European Union just out of needs, basically, because it's not going to last.
Thank you, Eleonora. I mean, I think we can take those last remarks as a call for action. That this is now time to act. And with this, I turn to Michal. Of course, crises are nothing new in terms of European history. I think in many ways it started from the biggest crisis of all in terms of the two world wars in the first half of the past century, and in many ways Europe has reinvented itself through the many crises it has faced. Diversity of views on solidarity and on the future is also nothing new in terms of European integration and its history. And I suppose once again it's a question of whether Europe can find unity in diversity, like one of the slogans says. I mean, so Michal, the word is yours. How do you see? I mean, you have yourself, edited the book based on the project with all these various points of view in terms of solidarity. What would you see as the takeaways, the building blocks that could be then constructively taken into account going forward?
Thank you very much, Jarmo. I think if you remember, the Vice President Barley today started off by saying the EU cannot function without solidarity. And I think in the end, if you want, you could also say it is lived European solidarity being a joint contribution to the future of Europe. And hence the conference on the future of Europe is nothing else than also contribution to allow to learn from each other, to understand each other, and to show willingness to understand each other. And that's the cornerstone of European integration. That's the starting point. And all the contributions today on the panel, but also in the edited volume, these 41 chapters show very nicely that we are in desperate need to not only learn about each other, but to advocate and to convince that we need to keep interested about each other. Because that's the necessary condition for whatever we want to achieve with regard to the future of Europe. So the willingness to understand each other is extremely important. And this is exactly what this volume about European solidarity in practice is all about. And we need to talk more also about our experiences. And I said at the beginning, if you read the 41 chapters, if you start the journey throughout Europe, you will see there is a very mixed picture about European solidarity in action. You have, and so far I have stressed more, let's say, the more negative kind of aspects around European solidarity in action, but there are actually also a number of examples, such as the Baltic Bubble, the regional concept of solidarity, which is a success story. Talk to colleagues from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. They will keep on referring to this very important experience during the first waves of COVID. But there are other important success stories. Brexit, in that regard, as sad as it is in the end a success story of European solidarity in action. Because what we showed the world is that we are capable of 26 member states rallying behind the position of Ireland. Not being the biggest member of the European Union in terms of GDP, in terms of population, but all countries, including Poland, including Hungary, rallied behind our negotiator, represented not by a government, but by a supranational institution. And it was only possible because of the European Commission, Monsieur Barnier, taking the lead as a supranational actor, keeping informed all the member states on a regular basis, that we we were closely behind the Irish position. It was the Irish position which we declared to be the European position in the negotiations. Ireland was showered with European solidarity. It's a big success story. And this is also how you can look at Brexit and the negotiations. And we probably would simply need to talk more about it, also about these success stories. And then last but not least, also linking to, I think, Eleonora's very good points she made, that in order to be able to act out of solidarity, you need to identify yourself with those in need. So in the end, if you want, you can only have European solidarity depends on a form of European identity, right? And here, obviously, yes, exchanges, city exchanges, again, with maybe also regions with which you might not have so much in common, right? With regions which are more characterized by maybe more Eurosceptic citizens, that you meet them, that you keep being interested in understanding each other, that you continue the dialogue and not basically retreat yourself in your bubble where it feels so much more comfortable. That we basically go out, I think, is extremely important. And so city twinning projects, yes, Erasmus, the young people having this experience, the European experience with positive and also negative aspects around living, so to say, this experience. And obviously also media playing an important role. All aspects Eleonora, Juha, the Vice President brought up in their contributions. And this is clearly also something you would find back in the various 41 contributions in this volume. Thank you very much, Jarmo.
Thank you, Michal. Very interesting points, and I think that one of your points about the necessity of developing kind of a European mental map and understanding each other, and also maybe geopolitically understanding Europe as a whole. I mean, that is something that will have to come about. And your point about Ireland, I think, was a very, very good one. I think, and also not even scripted in any particular detail in the treaties, but very much a political community acting together on the spot, on the basis of the needs of that particular political process. Juha wanted to raise the hand and wanted to maybe have it was maybe then just a mistake. Thank you, Michal. And then we'll turn for final words from Vice President Bali. Once again, the same question based on the discussion today, and obviously everything that's preceded it. I mean, would you see the building blocks in terms of the future for Europe?
Well, we are very engaged now in the Conference on the Future of Europe, and obviously we are an internal, very honest panel here. So I will say it as I experience it. I could do with a lot less politicians on this conference and with a lot more citizens. But it's very difficult to talk to colleagues about that. They feel kind of betrayed, having prepared for all of that, and then not that you want them to talk a bit less and to listen a bit more. It's my experience, but still we have really exceptionally engaged and motivated and dedicated people in this Conference on the Future of Europe. It is really fantastic how citizens work together, contribute, NGOs, but also individuals. It's really heartwarming. It won't solve all our problems, this conference, that's for sure. But I don't know who mentioned it before. It's our responsibility to make this a success by treating these contributions in the way that they deserve it. And that is not only up to the Parliament, it's also up to the other institutions, and we will fight very hard for that. It's not only about listening, it's also about reflecting and then processing. I'm very fond of what Michael said about Brexit and Ireland, because that's exactly how it was. And as I said, I was personally very much involved in this, and I had a lot of discussions on the British side. And until the very, very last moment, they did not believe that this would happen. Not the politicians, and especially not the media either. I don't know how often they told me, well, you in Germany, your car industry will put so much pressure on Merkel and her government that you will just, you won't stick together until the end. They even bluntly told me on BBC. And I absolutely agree. This is really the best experience on European solidarity that we've had for a long time. And yes, and I hope we will reflect upon that every time it becomes difficult. I also would like to say something about this willingness to understand each other. Again, I am not willing to understand every government, because you have agendas, political agendas in there that are dedicated to power and nothing else. That are not even dedicated to the national interests. But I'm absolutely willing to engage and share and exchange with people. And this is really what we should do, and that this is the only thing that will save the European Union. It's really connecting the people in every possible sense. And maybe my last word is thank you to the EPLO Helsinki, because it's also the EPLOs that play a very important role. And when I talked about the strategy of communication, the EPLOs are our window to the national citizens. So how you can communicate what Europe does and the European Union is all about, it helps incredibly. So thank you very much for the good work that you're doing all year long.
Thank you, Vice President Barley. Obviously very encouraging, and we of course trying to do our best and hope for, of course, to improve going forward. With words from Vice President Barley, we are going to bring this webinar to a close. I saw one more comment in the chat, just making a mention about the EU Solidarity Corps being a successful project in Finland, so we can register that as well. So it was a very interesting discussion, a very broad topic, obviously, and like Michael mentioned in the beginning, the contributions to the volume that will be coming out will reflect that also. But I think that in the end, I think the discussion was focused on a few things which could then prove to be building blocks for the future in terms of focusing on citizens, hoping for maybe some continuation to the participative process which has not been part of the Conference on Europe. And basically bringing people together, and that is a key for increased solidarity for EU in the future. So thank you, Juha, Michael, from the institutional point of view, to both TEPSA and FIIA. Once again, let's hope that this is a sign of future events to come, that we can come together again. Many thanks to Eleonora in Rome as well, and for Katrina from the part of the European Parliament. Thanks to everybody. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a more hopeful New Year. Perhaps that is something that we should remark at the end. Thanks a lot, and have a very nice end of the week. All the best.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you. Merry Christmas.